Hello and welcome to the next episode of The Prestige, a podcast about films, filmmaking and film theory.
Each week we'll focus on a particular movie, and while we will talk about that movie and our review of that movie, hopefully we'll kick us into a larger theme about movies, about culture, about discussions and things we can rant over.
We'll always end with some recommendations based on the various ideas we've come across in that discussion, and we'll begin by introducing ourselves. So, who are we?
So, I am Rob Maythorne. I am a filmmaker and photographer. I spent the last 10 years or so working in the British film industry, working on all manner of productions. My colleague and my co-host is Sam B. Knowles, a highly decorated and highly qualified lecturer in English. He lectures on books, movies, pop culture, and all things of that ilk. He studied, I believe, at Cambridge.
I did, yeah.
And currently has a master's from Leeds, I believe.
Well, PhD, but...
PhD, there you go.
Hang on. Who's counting? It's fine.
Lots of qualifications. Yeah. He's the smart one.
So, the film this week was my choice. And I went for Inside Out. And this is the latest film from Pixar after their successes with Toy Story, pretty much all of them, and Finding Nemo and The Incredibles. And the aforementioned were all before Pixar was bought out by Disney. And there was sort of a second wave of Pixar films post the Disney amalgamation, which started not particularly... Yeah, it wasn't a great start because their first film was Cars. No, but it went uphill from that. I like Ratatouille, which is the next one, and there have been various other films in the years since that we'll talk about. This is Inside Out was directed by Pete Docter. It's about an 11-year-old girl called Riley. It was 4 years in the making. It was initially... It came out of Doctor's own experiences as a child, and then those were brought back to him by his own daughter being of that age and having trouble dealing with a change, a big life change, in the way that Riley does in this film. So it's an 11-year-old girl called Riley and the anthropomorphized emotions that live in her brain. You have joy, sadness, anger, disgust and fear, who influence Riley's actions and her moods and memories. Joy is probably the most famous name. It's voiced by Amy Poehler. The others seem to be more recognisable voice actors, but not necessarily big Hollywood names. And the premise of the film is that joy and sadness get separated from the others at a particularly psychologically troubling time for Riley, and the film is about their attempt to journey back to headquarters, so what they call Riley's psychic centre, in time to stop an emotional disintegration. Rob, your thoughts?
I really quite liked Inside Out. It was... I'm not overly, particularly what I'd call a fanboy of Pixar. I'm not a worshipper at their altar. I haven't liked some of their films, but that being said, I really did like this one. I thought that it was very clever. I think that it handled a lot of, I suppose, biochemistry and neurology and all the kind of the workings of the brains quite well. It handled why you dream, why you forget things, why things have, like, as they put it, core memories, things that influence your personality. Mm-hmm. And the descent of Riley as the main character through a depressive period, whether it's depression or not is up for debate, but a depressive period, is beautifully handled in that I really enjoyed the fact that there wasn't really a cause and effect.
Mm.
You couldn't look at the numbskulls, or sorry, the emotions, and think, well, they've caused that, or are they reacting to the stimulus outside? So there was a nice kind of interplay there, and I thought it was very inventive in the way that it handles long-term storage of memories, imagination land, dreams, all that kind of paraphernalia of the psyche. I thought it handled very well. I think that I had a few issues with some of the characters. I thought it was kind of a little too obvious in its attempt to pull on our heartstrings. Pixar movies are infamous for kind of having an emotional moment, emotional core. We can talk about the Opened It Up. We can talk about the Toy Story 3 incinerator scene, large parts of WALL-E. It always renowned for having an emotional moment, and there's a very clear one in this in which we're supposed to clearly well up and have an emotional reaction, and it felt too telegraphed and it felt too cynically put in there for my personal tastes. But I did...
Well, we all know you're dead inside.
We all know I'm dead inside. But aside from that, I really did like it. I thought it was beautiful. And just while we're talking about it, I saw it at the cinema, and at all Pixar films, you do get a short before it. And I think it was called Lava Song, I think it was called.
Yes.
And it's a song about two volcanoes that fall in love, and it was beautiful, and I probably had more of an emotional reaction to that short film than I did to the entire of this film. But I don't mean that about I really did enjoy Inside Out.
Yeah. My reaction pretty much echoed yours. I thought it was there were bits of it that were very good. I didn't dislike the telegraphed emotional moment as much as you did. I thought the end was very good and the beginning was very good, and it got a bit baggy in the middle, so it could have lost about half an hour in the middle, which would have made it a very short film. There were, as you say, I think clever is the word that comes out of it. This idea of, well, you mentioned what happens to memories and long-term storage, and then the idea of abstract thought as well. And there's a sequence where joy and sadness go through abstract thought. I thought that was really interesting. And I think the big positive, the major positive about this, and it's something that we talked about discussing further this week, is the idea of stereotypes and how Riley is very definitely not an 11-year-old girl stereotype in the way that so many Hollywood, open inverted commas, princesses have been. And that's something that... And that's a huge positive for this film, and also something that has been moving forward in animation, certainly since I was watching animation as a child. But I think that's a huge positive. She's sporty, she doesn't get put in dresses, and also one of the big things about gender politics is that you can often make a big thing of it, and that's, even if I agree with you, it's almost as tiring hearing someone talk about it as it is someone be. It's like someone ranting about it is almost as annoying as the fact that stereotypes exist. And I thought it was really good how they just made nothing of this and got on with it. And I thought lots of there are little negatives to this, and as I said, the pacing's a bit off, and maybe some of the sentimentality could be less choreographed. But I think lots of those negatives, I would just say they're counteracted by this huge positive. Yeah,
I would agree. I think that on balance, I wildly enjoyed the film. I mean, I am pointing at niggles here. It was an enjoyable film. It made me laugh. Whilst it made me cry, it certainly did have an emotional reaction from me. These are niggles I'm talking about. And at a certain point, I am aware that I'm not the average movie punter. Between doing this podcast, having done a film degree, and working in the industry, I watch a film with different eyes to, say, the general punter. So I suppose a lot of my reviews should be taken with a pinch of salt because they come from a certain point of view.
Yeah.
But I think
no.
I do think that you're right. It does some interesting things with Stereotypes, and I think that it's very clever in the way it does that, because stereotypes by their very nature tend to be a bit one-dimensional. They tend to be a bit kind of plain and standard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The very nature of making sure that in a child's mind there are these 5 competing emotions, not even competing, but even so, they aren't competing. They are kind of who they are and they interact. And then even if you look a little wider at the parents, now the dad could have been a little bit of a stereotype of the busy, unconcerned father. But you see brief moments inside his head in which he's got all 5 emotions too. Yes, I think in his head it appears that the leader is anger rather than joy. And I think in the mum's head, sadness is the leader versus joy. But I think that really did some great work to kind of subvert those stereotypes, that even in that character that could be a bit of a stock character possibly, there is, by the nature of the movie, by the nature of the very setup of the movie, depth.
I love those bits with other characters' emotions and the mum and dad, and then even at the end we have the emotions present in everyone else's heads. But particularly that sequence with the mum and dad and Riley and the argument at the dinner table. I thought that was brilliantly handled. I hadn't noticed that it was different emotions taking the lead. But I did like the fact that there was that depth to these characters. It's something that it's not something that you pick up on a first watch, or you necessarily pick up as a 6-year-old being introduced to Pixar for the first time. But would you be introduced that old? Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. But they foregrounded the idea of this dimensional nature of stereotypes in that sequence I mentioned, where they go into abstract thought and the emotions literally become 2-dimensional and then 1-dimensional, and then they pop back up again. So this is a concern of Pete Doctorow. He's not called Doctorow, he's called Doctor.
Doctor is an author, so that's entirely.
Yes, I think that's entirely. Hang on, can I just pause and notice the fact that you made a literary reference?
I know.
We're all bad at that.
Clearly you're dragging me down to level.
Yeah, I thought there are lots of ways that this film plays with the idea of depth. One of the really really important things, I think, was the way that more emotions got added as she got older. And the console develops as she gets older. So as she becomes a more complex human being in the outside world, her inner life becomes more complicated.
Yes.
You see that at the end. Well, not to give spoilers at all, but there is a development at the end in her visual landscape. So that inner development matches an outer development that I thought was really good.
I think Pixar as a whole does great work with stereotypes. I mean, I said obviously this one with the nature of seeing the inside world of a character, which is obviously quite unusual. Aside from that, they do great work with adding beyond that. So look at something like Up. And Up is, I think, one of my favourite Pixar films. But the main character of Up is a grumpy old man who, yes, goes through the arc of learning to love this kid and love his life, but he never feels like a stereotype. And I suppose the other great example of this is Toy Story. Like Toy Story very much opens up with almost mythically iconic characters, the stock character of the cowboy and the spaceman. The very nature of them being toys means that they are mass-produced stock characters. And Pixar's sort of attempt to give everything a secret life really rounds them out, and you get the insecure cowboy who feels he's losing his touch, and then you get Buzz coming to terms with the fact that he isn't really a space ranger. And I think that Pixar has always done great work about subverting those stereotypes. I mean, the whole Monsters Inc. series is based around the idea that monsters aren't scary. And subverting those ideas of what we expect from our stock characters and from our stereotypes. I mean, looking a little bit wider, I do think it's worth noting that there is a slight difference between what I'd call stock characters and stereotypes.
Yes, and this is something that you get with drama in general, is the idea of the use of stock characters, but using stock characters to explore situations, explore emotional resonances in a way that opens things up for people. So yeah, I think you're right. There's stock characters can be very useful, and my coming down on this idea of stereotypes and suggesting that Pixar is moving beyond this is not. It's not a criticism of this idea of using stock characters at all.
There was a medieval drama movement. I'm trying to think what it was called, but it's escaping currently. That was all based around stock characters, very similar to Punch and Judy. We go into it knowing what all the characters are, and all the people watching it would know what those characters are. But they use that sort of stock characters to do new things. Commedia dell'arte. So that's what it is. Commedia dell'arte.
Yes, I was thinking theatre of the absurd, but that's something different.
And I think films can make great use of stock characters. So you can use like the grumpy teacher, the lonely old woman, the blonde cheerleader high school kid. You can use that stock character to do something interesting with it. And I think that's different to a stereotype. In my mind, a stereotype is what I call lazy filmmaking. That when you have a blonde, bubbly cheerleader who does nothing with that, that's boring.
Yes.
That's thousands of 90s movies.
But this is where, to bring it back to your favourite film, this is where something like Clueless works really well.
I was thinking the same thing.
This is ostensibly a stereotype, and yet that is undercut throughout the narrative.
I think that, to reference it again, the dad in Clueless is a great example. Now, dad in Clueless is a very hard-working, very high-powered lawyer, LA lawyer. And that's a very clear stock character that we all understand. But they subvert it with his care for his daughter and his care for his stepson and all that. And I think that it's important to, we're talking about this, distinguish between the two things. I think stock characters can be used to great effect. Stereotypes tends to be lazy filmmaking. And I think it's not hard to seek out a stereotype in any film, especially if you look at any kind of sort of representation of, I hate to use the phrase, but of any kind of representative minority. So women, disabled people, gay people, black people tend to suffer far worse from stereotypes.
Yeah.
I think if you look at even Jurassic World we talked about the other week, the main character, Claire, at times was very much stereotyped. She was the uptight woman who needed to learn the importance of the family. And that's a character we've seen thousands of times. And it wasn't that they took that idea and did something different with it. It was a film based on stereotypes.
Yes. And the pernicious thing with stereotypes is that two people can be stereotyped. In that film, you get Claire as the stereotype in the way that you just described, and also you have Chris Pratt's character, who is just as much of a stereotype, just in a different way. But it's far more damaging to female actors to have that sort of stereotype. I mean, Chris Pratt can just say, well, fine, whatever, and shrug it off. But the way that and this is something that we've talked about before, the way that the film industry is, it's in many sectors a very male-dominated world. And that means that characters like Claire's can suffer from stereotyping in the way that male characters don't.
And I think a lot of that comes down to what I'd say the lack of options. So if you look at the percentage of roles out there that are fully formed roles, stock characters or stereotypes, when you deal with women, black actors, especially in sort of teen comedies or any kind of thing, or either the stereotype of the gay best friend in a romantic comedy, the percentage of those roles that are available that are stereotypes is much higher. For a female actress to seek out interesting and unique roles that are fully formed is a lot harder. It's far easier to find roles that are stock stereotype characters without anything interesting and nothing unusual to see.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that films serve badly, and that's why one of the reasons that I really enjoyed Mad Max when we covered that was that it really felt like, whilst it did have some stereotype characters in it, the female representation certainly was all across the gambit and felt the opposite of a stereotype. You had the old wizened women, you had obviously Furiosa herself, and then you had the brides. And that felt complete, and it was, I said, it was noticeable by the absence everywhere else.
And to bring it back to Inside Out, that the treatment of Furiosa in Mad Max and the treatment of her disability is something you mentioned at the time, but that we're not even going to make a thing of this, we're just going to move on. It's not a narrative hook. It's exactly the same thing you get with Riley in Inside Out, that we don't make a thing of the fact that she likes hockey and doesn't like pink. It's just who she is. And that was something that was really good about Charlize Theron's character, that it was just part of who she was, and we could just get on with the film.
And I think I agree, and I think that there was a nice bit in Inside Out, just to link to that, where the just a bit of a spoiler here for everyone coming up, the resolution of the film was not about banishing anything from that world. The resolution of the film is coming to terms with the fact that you will have sadness and anger and disgust and envy and joy in your life, and that it's not that sadness is the enemy to be banished, and that to subvert that stereotype you need to have all five things in there. That if it ended up with just being joy in charge and just joy around, she would have ended as a stereotype. But by ending with all five characters there and part of the team, you feel like they're kind of saying, this is how people are. People are everything. They are happy, they are sad, they are disgusted, they are angry, and everything in between. And and it's a mixture of those. It isn't like you have happy moments, some moments. You have moments that are happy and sad, and happy and angry, and all these kind of things.
A really interesting thing about that is from an interview with Pete Docter, he hit a bit of a roadblock in this. Well, this film took 4 years in the making. It was the first without Steve Jobs' input, but it was started in 2011. And he hit a bit of a roadblock, Pete Docter, and the studio wanted the film to go in a certain direction, and he wasn't happy with that and couldn't see how it was going to work out. And he basically slumped into a depression of his own and just went for a walk and thought, oh my God, everything's going wrong. And that realisation that you get in Riley's head at the end of the film is a realisation that he came to. He himself thought, well, actually, this can be part of the film. This idea of bringing together different emotions is what this film is about.
Lovely. So, as always, Sam, we end with the recommendations.
We do, yes.
Your thoughts this week?
Well, this week, it would be remiss of me to do a week talking about a Pixar film and not recommend WALL-E, which is just an amazing film. And it's one of the I suppose one of the films that Pixar did with Disney once they'd got into the swing of it. So post Cars, and WALL-E's a brilliant film. Not a lot of dialogue at all, but that really doesn't matter. And it has it's playing with the same idea of emotions and of bringing together apparently conflicting emotions to achieve a resolution. So if you haven't seen it, go and see WALL-E immediately. My second one is this is my less obvious one. It's interesting, but not necessarily in a good way. It is just quite interesting as a historical document. It's a short film. It's available on YouTube, and it really is short. It's less than 10 minutes. Called Reason in Motion. It was made in 1943 as a propaganda film.
Okay.
And the premise of this is that it's an American propaganda film, and it was made to tell people that if they followed emotion and ignored reason, then they would be as bad as Hitler. And
Okay.
so generally, it does go on to talk about Hitler later on. So the last bit of it is. It's very obviously propaganda, but the beginning has some really interesting. Before it moves on to talking about how all Germans are, they're just carried on a wave of emotion and they've lost the power of rational thought. Before that happens, there are some interesting points to the film. Particularly, there's a bit between a man and a woman, and I thought. There's quite a progressive attitude for early 1940s films, so that's an interesting one to check out. Not necessarily very good, as I said, but it's a particularly interesting one. It's called Reason and Emotion.
Fair enough. Well, you've probably out-obscured me this week, which is a rare feat, because both my recommendations are quite mainstream choices.
Oh, right.
My first choice, sticking in the Pixar world, is Toy Story 3.
Good film.
I really enjoyed Toy Story 3. I wasn't as keen on 2, but I really liked 3. I think they pulled it back. I think that it is the only Pixar film, apart from Up, to truly move me to tears.
Right.
And that doesn't happen very often at all when it comes to me in films, but genuinely, I saw cinema and I'm weeping at cinema. I think it's a great film. I think it's wonderfully done. I think it's, for a third in the series, it's outstanding work. And I think, as we talk about that, it kind of the emotions that come with it are outstanding. My slightly less obvious one is the 1985 semi-cult classic Clue.
Wait, is this the one that's based on Cluedo?
Yes, it is. It stars Tim Curry, Christopher Lloyd, loads of people recognise, and it basically is Cluedo. So you've got Mrs. Peacock, Mrs. White, Professor Plum, Mr. Green, Colonel Mustard, Miss Scarlet, all in a house in which a murder happens and have to solve it.
Right.
Now, the reason why I'm kind of putting this into it is that being based on the Clue board game, these are the stockiest of stock characters. There's a name we all know, an image we all conjure in our heads straight off the bat of what these people, what these characters are. And it does some work to subvert that and some work to not subvert that. But I think it's a very interesting film to look at how it works with stock characters in this way. And also, it's a great film, and it's infamous for having about 3 or 4 different endings. So depending on which cinema you saw it in, you get a different ending to the film.
Oh, right.
And if you get on DVD, they're all on there. But you can, on the DVD, pick random ending, and it'll watch it, and you watch it at the end, it has a different ending. There's 4 endings. But it does some great work with taking stock characters and doing interesting things with them and it being fun. So I think through all of this, I don't want to say that having stock character stereotypes is a bad thing entirely. It can be done well. It's not often done. But with this, it felt like it's done well. And even sort of characters like Mrs. Peacock or Miss Scarlet, which may be the young sexual flirty character, is given depth.
Right. Brilliant.
So that's my recommendation for this week.
Good. This week, I believe, is not, as your wife misheard you, Michael, the John Travolta film of questionable merit.
Michael.
It is your call, yes.
Now, Sam and I had agreed on the film for next week, but I'm about to completely change it on him.
Right.
And I am going to watch, I recommend you watch, The Station Agent.
The Station Agent?
The Station Agent. The Station Agent is the story of Pete Dinklage as a train spotter who moves to rural New Jersey after he inherits a train station.
Right.
There he meets a couple of locals and sort of goes from there. It's very slow cinema. It's very emotional cinema. It's very in the sort of early 2000s sort of indie mumblecore genre.
Right.
But it's very, very good.
Okay, good.
So I just saw it on my collection and thought, we'll watch that. So that's the film for next week, The Station Agent from 2003.
Brilliant. Okay, we welcome your correspondence. If you want to get in touch, we're on Twitter at Prestige Podcast.
Or you can find me at Rob Kaiju.
Or me at life_academic.
If you get a chance and you listen to this on iTunes, please give us a recommendation. It's really how we get in front of more eyes and more ears, so more people can enjoy our random ramblings about film.
Okay, thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye.
The Prestige is a Kaiju Industries production. Check out their other work at facebook.com/Kaiju Industries. Rawr! Arg.